All right, what's going on, everybody? About a month ago or so, I did an MLB version of this, and in this video, I'm going to be ranking every NFL team's relevancy. And what I mean by this is basically franchise as a whole, basically where they stand, basically how they've been, and how much they're fall by with the media, the fans, and basically just about every media outlet you can imagine. So I'm ranking them based on relevancy, not really, well, I guess kind of how they are right now, but really just about how relevant they are as a franchise. And in my MLB one of this, I had my criteria of judging a franchise if I'm unsure of how to on if I'm unsure of how to rank them. I go by these three questions. So number one, have they at least made the playoffs or have had playoff success in the last 5 years? So I'll be going by since 2020. Number two, is the ownership good? And number three, are they at least a good team? And if at least two of the answers to that are no, then in my opinion, they're irrelevant. So I have my I got my tiers right here. So obviously, you got at the top, these teams are always relevant no matter what. Then you got the second tier, which teams that are relevant, they may fall down a little bit lower depending on how they are, but for the most part, they are relevant for right now. Then you got the teams that are in the talks, as I say, as they're not completely bad or amazing, but they are talked about to a fault. Then you got teams that are just mid. They are neither irrelevant nor relevant. I really don't know what to put them at. That's what mid means. Then you got teams that are bad, but they're not irrelevant, but they're like one bad season away from becoming irrelevant. They're like endangered. And then you got bottom of the barrel relevant, no explanation needed. So without further ado, I am going to rank all 32 teams based on how relevant they are. So where does your team fall? So let's get started to it. And I'm just going to go team by team here. We got the New Orleans Saints first of all. Well, if this was the 2020 season, there wouldn't be a question where the Saints would be. They would easily be at the top right here. At worst, relevant right here. But here's the thing. Saints have not made the playoffs since 2020. They have struggled mightily without Drew Brees. I think it says a lot about ownership in the front office right there. I am putting the Saints in irrelevant. They finished last place in the NFC South. Yeah, they finished last place in the NFC South, and it doesn't look like things are going to get any better for the Saints. They got a very dark future ahead of them. I'm putting the Saints in irrelevant, even though they won a Super Bowl in the last 20 years, but I am putting them in irrelevant for right now. Miami Dolphins. So the Dolphins, this is a tricky one for Miami because my thing with the Dolphins is that they're good. They definitely are talked about. I have questions about ownership though, like I think a lot of Dolphins fans do. Stephen Ross is very controversial. He's made a lot of bad headlines over the years. So I think Miami, they're definitely not irrelevant. They're definitely not bad. I don't know about mid because they can at least make the playoffs. They're at worst in the talks. You know, my question is, do you buy Miami as a serious contender even though they're talked about? With me, I am going to put Miami in the talks. Um like if they won playoff games, I think they would be in the top 2. But the fact that they are coming off a pretty bad season with Tua Tagovailoa's concussions and all the underwhelming things that they did this past season, I really don't know if I can call Miami relevant, but they are talked about to an extent. I'm going to put Miami in the talks. Baltimore Ravens, they are always relevant. The Ravens, as a disgruntled Steeler fan, I will say they have been one of the most successful franchises in the NFL since they were founded in 96. Yes, founded in 96. Okay. The Ravens were considered a new franchise. Okay. The Browns kept all their history. So let's get that out of the way. And despite a couple of bad seasons, the Ravens are always talked about. They have always been relevant. They have never really been a bottom feeder. I'm putting the Ravens in the top, always relevant. I hate to say that, but it's just how it is. Cincinnati Bengals, they're another tricky one. They're not bad. They're like, if this was 2020, they would definitely be irrelevant. If this was still 2020, they're not bad either, so they definitely avoid the first two. Mid, Cincinnati's defense might put them in mid just because of that. But my thing with the Bengals is that they went to the Super Bowl they went to the Super Bowl 3 years ago. So I really don't know if I can call them mid. They've been good since 2021. So I would say they're above the Dolphins if I'm going to put them in the talks. I think that's at the very least where the Bengals should be right now in the talks. But are they relevant? You know what? I'm going to put Cincinnati in relevant. Just because of the offense they got, just because I think ownership has done a really good job with turning the franchise around. I don't know if I'm going to put them in always relevant because, like I said, the Bengals, they had a lot of moments in their franchise where they were irrelevant, but they're a good team right now and they're usually talked about and they're usually a favorite in the AFC. So I think that says a lot. So I'm going to put them in bottom tier relevant for right now. Like they barely miss out on being in the talks. So I'm going to put them in relevant. Denver Broncos, kind of like the Bengals. If I was recording this last season, they would be right here. But they made the playoffs this past season. So, you got to give a lot of credit to the Denver Broncos. They made the playoffs. They had a very good year. I think Greg Penner and George Patton, they did a really good job with saving the franchise. Can they be on the same level as Pat Bowlen in the 90s, though? That'll be to be determined. I'm going to put Denver in the talks, and I'm going to put them a little bit below Miami. I don't know if I'm ready to call Denver relevant just yet, but they definitely avoid irrelevant, bad, and mid. I'm going to put them in the talks right now. New York Giants, no brainer. They are irrelevant. I don't care if they won a playoff game 2 years ago. The Giants have been one of the biggest laughing stocks in the NFL over the last decade or so. They are definitely irrelevant. They're consistently bad. They consistently finish last in the NFC East. John Mara has just done a horrible job with them. They just got rid of Daniel Jones after choosing him over Saquon Barkley. So that's enough to put the Giants in irrelevant right there. Yes, I know they won a playoff game a couple years ago against Minnesota, but that was by a complete fluke. They got blown out in the divisional by Philadelphia. The Giants are definitely irrelevant. Speaking of Minnesota, they're next. Definitely not in these two. Mid. I don't know about mid, though, because the Vikings actually have a pretty solid team, and they're usually talked about. In the talks, again, that's at least where they should be. I'm going to put the Vikings in relevant, and I'm putting them a little bit below Cincinnati because the Vikings, they do have some good players we're talking about, and they do get some attention in the media. Like I said, these teams, I don't know, they're talked about, but I don't know if they're consistently talked about, So that's why I'm putting the Vikings here. They're coming off a great year, so that's why I'm putting the Vikings right here in relevant. LA Rams, I am putting them in always relevant, and I am going to put them a little bit above the Ravens. Why? Because the Rams have had playoff success, and they won a Super Bowl not too long ago. You know, if this was 8 years ago, the Rams would definitely be irrelevant, but Sean McVay has done a magnificent job as head coach, and Stan Kroenke, he has done wonders since taking over for the Rams, and he has made them a consistently really good team. Rams are usually talked about, seeing that they're in the LA market as well. That's enough to catapult them to the top spot. I am putting the Rams in always relevant. Tampa Bay Bucks. I'm going to put the Bucks in mid, actually. Maybe a surprise to some people. But the Bucks, they're kind of good by default. I mean, sure, Baker Mayfield, phenomenal year. Mike Evans, phenomenal year. They got a really good offense altogether. Defense holds them back, though. But the thing about the Bucks, the reason that they're not really talked about a whole lot is because they play in possibly the weakest division in the NFL, in the NFC South. So for that reason, I'm putting Tampa in mid. I don't know if I can fully buy them as relevant, but they're definitely not irrelevant. Like I said, they're just kind of good by default. So that's why I'm putting Tampa in mid. Detroit Lions, they are going in relevant, and I am putting them a little bit above Minnesota, behind Cincinnati. Martha Ford. Detroit's owner, man, not Martha Ford. God, what? Sheila Ford. I'm sorry. Total blank right there. Sheila Ford. I'm so sorry. Sheila Ford. Phenomenal job since taking over as owner for Detroit. She's made them into a powerhouse. Dan Campbell, obviously one of the most likable coaches in the NFL. Detroit won 15 games this season. They won 2 playoff games last year, despite them going one and done. The Lions have catapulted all the way from irrelevant to relevant. What a leap for the Lions. Because like I said, if I was recording this in 2022, they would definitely be right here in irrelevant. But the recent success for the Lions, they're not always going to be relevant, but right now they are relevant. So that's why I'm putting them here. Chicago Bears, another easy one, irrelevant. Chicago Bears have been a laughingstock for so long. They can never get a good quarterback. The McCaskies have done a horrible job. Haven't won a playoff game since 2010, consistently in last place in the NFC North. And it doesn't look like it's going to get any better for the Bears. I mean, I do like the Ben Johnson hire. If there's anyone that can make Caleb Williams into a great quarterback, it's him. But until proven otherwise, the Bears are irrelevant. That's a no-brainer. San Francisco 49ers, they're a tricky one because I am tempted to put them in always relevant because everyone loves talking about the 80s. You know, everyone loves talking about the 80s. Everyone loves talking about, the recent success they had. And it's warranted, but are they relevant for the time being, seeing that they came off of a Super Bowl hangover? That might be a stretch. You know what? I'm going to put the 49ers in always relevant. They are usually very much talked about. I'm going to put them a little bit below Baltimore just because, A, the Ravens won a Super Bowl recently, and B, that Super Bowl win was over the 49ers, no less. So, yeah, I'm going to put the 49ers in always relevant. They're usually talked about. They're usually usually favored in the NFC. They usually get a lot of media attention because of the team they got. Everyone, I mean, who are some of the first players that you think about when you think of the 49ers? Montana, Rice, Dwight Clark, Ronnie Lott, Roger Craig, Steve Young, Terrell Owens, Frank Gore. I mean, the list goes on and on. I'm putting the 49ers in always relevant. I mean, 5 Super Bowls. That's enough to put them in always relevant in my book. Philadelphia Eagles. Controversial one, but I'm putting the Eagles in relevant because I don't know if they're always relevant. Because here's the thing, Howie Roseman and Jeff Lurie have made the Eagles one of the most consistent franchises in the NFL for the past 30 years. And the Eagles, I'm recording this on February 2nd, by the way, so this is a week before the Super Bowl. So, the Eagles are gunning for their second Lombardi in the last decade. And to many people that may put them in always relevant, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to put the Eagles in always relevant. And I'm going to put them a little bit above San Francisco for the time being. Actually, a little bit above Baltimore, too, just below LA. Yeah, you know what? Now that I think about it, the Eagles, they're going to always be irrelevant. Like I said, they play in Philadelphia. It's one of the biggest cities in the United States. But, like I said, just because you play in a big city, that doesn't necessarily mean you're always relevant. I mean, take a look at the Giants and Bears. Those are two of the biggest cities in the United States right there. So that's a kind of a moot point. But yeah, after I convinced myself I'm going to put the Eagles in always relevant, they are usually a favorite in the NFC. And the fact that they are getting that second ring, they are playing to get that second ring, that's enough for me to change my mind. I'm going to put Philly in always relevant. Raiders, irrelevant. And yeah, I'm going to put them right here. Oh, I'm putting them in irrelevant. I mean, this is a franchise that's been bad for over 20 years now. And it's sad because the Raiders, they used to be a great franchise. The 60s, 70s, most of the 80s, parts of the 90s, and the early 2000s, the Raiders were one of the most prolific franchises in the NFL. And ever since the Tuck rule and getting their doors blown off in Super Bowl 37, the Raiders have been a laughingstock. They've only made the playoffs twice since then, haven't won a playoff game since 2002, haven't won the AFC West since 2002, and I don't see it getting any better soon with the Raiders. I mean, Pete Carroll was a great hire. Russell Wilson's rumored to want to go to the Raiders, which I'm all for it as a Steeler fan. But for me, I'm putting the Raiders in irrelevant. I mean, just that they've been so bad for so long. No one really gives the Raiders a second thought. So they're irrelevant. Green Bay Packers, yeah, they're always relevant. It don't matter. It don't matter how bad they are. It don't matter how good they are. The Packers, they're always going to be talked about. They're always going to be a sweetheart in the country. That's just how it is with the Green Bay Packers. When you're a legendary, historic franchise, you get benefits. So yeah, Green Bay, no contest. They're always going to be relevant. Washington Commanders, kind of like the Lions. If I was making this last year, they would easily be an irrelevant. But Washington, man, the run that they had, even though they got blown out in the championship game, Josh Harris, he has really turned things around for Washington. What a job he's done so far. Jaden Daniels, that kid's got a really bright future ahead of him. That offense in general, man, they just need patch-up work on the defense. So am I ready to put them in relevant right now? I don't know about that. But one great season has me putting them in the talks. And I'm going to put them a little bit above Miami just because Washington's won a playoff game recently. Even if Washington hadn't won a playoff game since that 05 season, they'd be above Miami because the Dolphins have the longest active longest active playoff win drought. So I'm going to put Washington in the talks. And if they have another great year, I can bump them up to right here easily. But for right now, I'm going to put them in the talks. Let's see how Jaden Daniels does in his sophomore season. Let's see what Josh Harris can do as new owner. I mean, anyone's an upgrade over Dan Snyder. So there you go right there. Arizona Cardinals, they are irrelevant in my opinion. They have not won a playoff game since 2015, and I'm going to put them a little bit below the Giants. So, yeah, Arizona, they have not, I believe Arizona hasn't even had a winning season since that 2015 season. They had a winning season in 2021, but then they went one and done in the playoffs. And Arizona is really not that good. So, actually, I'm going to bump them up to bad. Like, if the Cardinals finish under 500 again in 2025, I'm going to put them in irrelevant. So, yeah, the Cardinals, like I said, they are like one more bad season away from being an irrelevant. They're in danger to being irrelevant. But for right now, I'm putting them in bad. So that's my take for the Cardinals right there. Pittsburgh Steelers, despite what I say about them, despite all my whining and crying, as my critics say, let's be honest, the Steelers are always going to be relevant. I mean, They get a good amount. They get a really good amount of coverage when it comes to the media. They get a decent amount of primetime games a year. I hate to say it, but the Pittsburgh Steelers are kind of like the AFC version of the Dallas Cowboys at this point. The Steelers could go 0-17 this season and they'll still be talked about. I mean, that's just how it is. They're always relevant. The 6 Lombardis help out, kind of like the Packers. When you have when you have a rich history and when you have a legendary team that's worth talking about, that's going to give you benefits every time. So like I said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. The fact is the Steelers are always going to be relevant no matter what. Buffalo Bills. I'm going to put them in relevant because I don't know, because up until the Josh Allen era and up until the team that they currently have right now, they were never always relevant. They were just really mediocre to bad. But the current regime they have right now with their owner, the current job that Brandon Beane has done, I think it's definitely enough to put Buffalo in relevant. I don't know if they're always gonna be relevant though. You know, I think the thing that's preventing, kind of like the Bengals, the thing that's going to prevent me from putting Buffalo in always relevant is if they win a Super Bowl, or at least go to one. But then again, I would have to put the Bengals there. But you get the point. Buffalo, they're relevant right now, but I don't know if they're always going to be relevant. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm going to go with Buffalo right there. Atlanta Falcons, irrelevant. Irrelevant. Easy. Irrelevant. And I'm going to put them a little bit below the Giants because the Falcons have not won a playoff game since 2017. They haven't even made the playoffs since then. And the Falcons haven't even had a winning season since then. Atlanta, if I was recording this years ago, they would probably be irrelevant, but they have not been good. They have been absolutely terrible since then. And I'm putting them in irrelevant right now. Until they make the playoffs again, until they actually do well, I'm putting them in irrelevant. Seattle Seahawks. This one is tricky. The Seahawks, they're really tricky. Because the thing with them is that Jody Allen, I think to her credit, she does a really good job with building good teams in Seattle. And it's shown because the Seahawks have won a Super Bowl in the last 15 years. So that alone is enough to make them somewhat talkable. But then ever since, I would say, maybe 2016, the Seahawks have just kind of fluctuated from being mediocre to good. But I'm not going by since then. I'm going by since 2020. And since 2020, Seattle has won the NFC West. Then they lost Russell Wilson, and now they're kind of there. You know what I mean? I'm going to put the Seahawks in mid, little bit below Tampa Bay, because the Seahawks, sure, they made the playoffs back in 2022, but they've also missed the playoffs the last 2 seasons, and they haven't won a playoff game since 2019. I think the thing that's saving them from being bad is ownership. Because like I said, I think Jody Allen has done a decent enough job to keep them somewhat competitive. But do you really buy the Seahawks as a legit contender? I don't know. I'm putting them in mid. I just think that they're very mediocre. I don't know if they're relevant. You don't really see a whole lot of people talking about them on talk shows, or you don't really see them getting a lot of primetime games. So I'm going to put the Seahawks in mid. That's just my opinion, though. They're tricky to rank. Patriots. Definitely, if this was the Brady era, they'd be here for sure. But actually, they'd be right here if this was still the Brady-Belichick era. But the Patriots are one of the worst teams in the NFL right now. So you'd think I'd put them right here. They haven't won a playoff game since winning Super Bowl 53, which is crazy to think about. They made the playoffs in the last 5 years. They got their doors blown off by Buffalo. So are the Patriots relevant right now? But, like I said, when you had a historic run, like I said, sorry about that. I double clicked. I would love to put them here though, but when you have a historic run, it's going to give you benefits. But the thing is that the 49ers, the Steelers, and the Packers, they've all at least been to the playoffs. They've all been in the playoffs, unlike the Patriots. I am going to put New England in bad. I am going to put them in bad. Little bit above Arizona. Like, if New England has another bad year this year, they could probably be irrelevant. They really need to they really need to turn things around. I think that Josh McDaniels hire was really just a desperate move. Belichick's not there anymore. Yeah, I'm putting the Patriots in bad. They'd be a little higher if they won a playoff game in 2021 or if they made it in 2022. They've missed the playoffs the last 3 seasons, so now they're just on full-on rebuild mode. So I am putting the Patriots in bad. If they have another bad year, they could go in irrelevant, but I'm going to put them in bad right now. Cleveland Browns, irrelevant. They're irrelevant. I don't need to say anything else. Cleveland Browns are irrelevant. Yeah, they won a playoff game in the last 5 years over us, but the Browns, they have just been mediocre to bad ever since then. You never really buy the Browns as a real contender. And the only reason the Browns are talked about nowadays is because of the Watson trade. So they're talked about for the wrong reasons. The Browns are irrelevant. That's just my take on it. They are irrelevant. Houston Texans. Tricky one again. I want to put them in relevant because they have won playoff games in the last 2 years. And they've made the playoffs. And I mean, CJ Stroud, he has a lot of promise to him. But man, that AFC South is just such a joke. I am putting Houston. I'm going to put Houston in the talks. And I'm going to put them a little bit above Miami because the Texans, they do have some playoff success in the last 5 years. So Houston's really close to being mid, in my opinion, but I think that they're a little bit better than Tampa and Seattle. Like, I'd pick Houston to beat either of these teams. Let me put it to you like that. And, like I said, they do have some playoff success. They're not really a media darling. They're not really, but they're not bad either. So I'm going to put them in the talks. I mean, they do get a decent amount. They do get some coverage. Like I said, these teams are talked about to a fault. So I'm going to put the Texans right here. Kansas City, yeah, no contest. As long as they have Patrick Mahomes, as long as they got Andy Reid, they're always going to be relevant. That's just all there is to it. Haven't had a losing season since 2012. Andy Reid and Clark Hunt have done a magnificent job with the franchise, more specifically Clark Hunt. I mean, what else do you want me to say? They're looking to become the next dynasty. Well, they are the next dynasty, but they're looking to become the first team to ever three-peat in the Super Bowl era. They've made the Super Bowl in 4 of the last 6 years. I mean, wow. Yeah, they're always relevant. That's an easy one. Another easy one, the Dallas Cowboys, they're always relevant. Kind of like us. Dallas could go 0-17. How often do you hear about the media talking about the Dallas Cowboys? How often do you hear about it? All the fucking time. Cowboys are always relevant. Even though they don't deserve it, but that's why they're the least of the always relevant. They are like one step away from being relevant, but they're always going to be relevant, let's be honest. The Chargers, they're mid. I'm putting LA in mid. No playoff wins since 2018. They flip-flop from being bad to good. They got blown out in the playoffs by The Texans, they get talked about a little bit, but I really don't think they're a legit contender. But they're not irrelevant. That's just my take on it. They're not irrelevant. Chargers are going in mid, in my opinion. New York Jets, irrelevant. New York Jets are irrelevant. A little bit above the Raiders because the Jets have a more recent playoff win than the Raiders do, if you can believe that. The Jets have the longest active playoff drought, having not made it since 2010. But the last time they won a playoff game was that divisional game against New England back in 2010. So, but yeah, the Jets, I mean, they're just such a joke. They're just such a bad franchise. No one gives the Jets a second thought whatsoever. No one thinks they're a real team. They're irrelevant. Next up, Carolina Panthers, they're also irrelevant. I believe Carolina has not won a playoff game since their Super Bowl year in 2015. And for that reason, I am putting the Panthers probably a little bit below Atlanta. I mean, the Panthers, they really haven't gotten a lot of media coverage. They hardly get any at all. People forget that they're even just an NFL team. Yeah, Carolina, they're irrelevant. Tennessee Titans. If I was making this about 3 years ago, they'd probably be like in the talks or the relevant area. But now they're like in full-fledged rebuild mode. And they have not won a playoff game since that 2019 season. So it's coming up on a while for Tennessee as well. I'm going to put the Titans in bad. Like, if they have one more bad season, they are definitely going in irrelevant. I don't think they're there yet. They definitely have potential to be there. But for right now, I'm putting Tennessee in bad. Indianapolis Colts are the definition of mid. They are the epitome of being a mid team. They're never terrible, but they're never great. They're never completely ignored, but they do get a little bit of attention. And I think the team shows it. So for that reason, I'm putting Indy in mid. I mean, there you go right there. And finally, the New York Jacksonville Jaguars. They're irrelevant. They're irrelevant. I mean, sure, they had that fluke playoff win against the Chargers in 2022 where LA blew a 27-0 lead. But then Jacksonville went back to being a joke. No one takes Jacksonville seriously. They're irrelevant. So there you have it. This is my opinion. Yeah, this is ranking every team based on how relevant they are. The teams that are always relevant: the Kansas City Chiefs, the LA Rams, the Philadelphia Eagles, Baltimore Ravens, Green Bay Packers, my Steelers, 49ers, and the Cowboys. Then you got teams that are talked about, but my question with them is, are they always going to be relevant? These teams are the Bengals, Bills, Lions, and Vikings. And then you got teams that are in the talks. They have a lot of potential to be up to relevant, but it's to be determined. So you got teams Washington, Houston, Miami, and Denver. Then you got teams that are just very mediocre. They're never completely ignored, but they're never given a full coverage as well, if that makes any sense. Tampa, Seattle, the Chargers, and Indy. Then you got just straight up bad teams, but they're like one bad season away from being irrelevant. Tennessee, New England, and Arizona. And then you got the bottom of the barrel: Jacksonville, Cleveland, New Orleans, the Giants, Atlanta, Carolina, Chicago, the Jets, and the Raiders. So there you have it. Where does your team fall? Where do you think that you would have a different ranking? I would love to know. Let me know what you think down below. And that will do it for this video. Maybe I'll do one for hockey and basketball as well. But these are just my rankings. Let me know what you think.